I'm so excited to see you again, Angelina. It's so good to see you. Everyone, episode 73 featuring Angelina launched this week, and you have to listen to how fascinating it is to be a winemaker. Before we get into tasting, though, we really should talk about how your family and your ancestors were really wine pioneers in this country. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really started with my great-grandparents, Cesare and Rosa, moving from Italy over here to the United States and residing in Virginia, Minnesota. And it's really kind of unique, and it's kind of a cool, interesting, fascinating story because he came over to work in the mines, and shortly after coming over, he actually lost his brother in a mining accident and realized mining wasn't really his thing and that this wasn't going to be a long-term career for him. So he and my great-grandmother ended up buying a grocery store. And this is pre-Prohibition. And soon Prohibition hit, and the demand for grapes getting shipped from California over to the East Coast was massively underway because you were legally allowed to make 200 gallons of personal wine for either personal consumption, medicinal, or religious purposes were the two main reasons. So every family member, every household basically needed grapes shipped from California all the way over. So that's how our family actually got started over 100 years ago in the industry. And fast forward, our family actually acquired my great-grandparents and my grandfather, and then my great-uncle Robert actually acquired Charles Krug Winery in 1943. And our family still owns that today. And we're now happily in the 5th generation with a baby boy that's only 2 months old. My sister just had a little one. Aww. So we're really excited about that. And then the projects that we're actually talking about today are actually the personal projects that my sisters and I actually do on the side, separate from our family business.
Yes, I can't wait to talk to that. But talk about cold fermentation too, because your
my grandfather
invented cold fermentation in winemaking. And you know, I love one of the comments on the podcast was that, you know, it's just so incredible that who would have known that this is something that winemakers have continued to use since the 30s or the 40s, right?
Yeah, I always joked with him before he passed away. My grandfather, Peter Mondavi Sr., actually lived to 101. And we actually joked, being like, why didn't you patent it? Because you'd be a freaking gajillionaire if you actually did.
Oh, wow.
Because cold fermentation, the beauty behind cold fermentation, and we'll talk about it with the first wine that we're going to be tasting, which is our Chenin Blanc. All white wines, for you to retain that beautiful, vibrant, aromatic nose, when you actually put it through cold fermentation, where we drop the temperature to basically the brink of yeast actually surviving, when you do it very slowly and that fermentation slow, you're not going to lose any of those delicate aromatics. And that's so critical, and it's so important. Red wine, it's a totally different beast because you want a little bit of that heat to extract the color. But for white wines, that colder temperature really allows to retain those beautiful aromatics that we're really looking for. And that's something that my grandfather created. And every modern day winemaker and brewer and cider maker actually uses those methods today. So it's really universally world renowned and widely used. And I think it's really cool.
It's incredible. On the podcast, you talked about how you became the first in California to do virtual wine tastings at the onset of the pandemic, which is incredible. And we're going to be tasting 2 of your own wines today. We're going to talk about the origins for them and how you work on them with your sisters. But first, can you kind of talk about the rules and the kind of how-tos for wine tasting? What elements are involved?
Yeah, when you first, it's perfect. Actually, I've got a bottle or a glass of white wine in front of me. But one of the
is this what you've got in front of you?
Yep, the Chenin Blanc. So this is the 2020 Chenin Blanc. This is actually our label. My sister Alicia, our CEO and marketing guru, actually designed it. And this is 100% Chenin Blanc. But when you're actually taking a glass and you pour that glass, I always say don't swirl first. What you want to do is you want to take your nose up, take a huge whiff of it. And for me, as you can see, I'm always sticking my nose all the way in because I'm trying to get all those delicate aromatics. So my nose just gets infiltrated with basically all those smells and those senses. And the beautiful part about Chenin Blanc can be very, very floral like ours is. So it has a little bit of that jasmine and that orange blossom. But as soon as you swirl that wine, those delicate aromatics will actually go by the wayside. And then all you really smell is lemon zest and maybe key lime pie. I'm almost getting like a lemon curd, lemon tart.
I'm getting citrus, yes, like a tart, like a sweet lemon, like a sweeter.
I always say Meyer lemon is usually.
Meyer lemon, perfect.
Yeah, that sweet, just that hint of that sweetness. Yeah. But when you swirl that, all those delicate aromatics of that orange blossom and that jasmine actually go out of the glass, and you can't capture it again until you pour a new fresh glass if you've left the cork actually on the bottle. So it's really kind of interesting. Then what you do is you'll take a taste of it. And then it's important. It's not a very pleasant term, but it's called slurping. And what you do is you actually, while the wine's in your mouth, you'll actually take a little bit of air through your teeth, and it's like a, and what that does is it hits all your senses. So your sweet, your sour, your umami, and salty, and it actually wakens all those senses up in your tongue. And when that actually happens, then you can actually kind of get a little bit more critical on what you're actually tasting.
That's interesting, Angelina, because I always thought that technique was for sort of smelling while you're tasting at the same time, but it's not. It's about waking up all your taste buds, right?
Yeah, because the first thing that it's going to hit, and the first thing that you'll notice is when you take that sip, all of a sudden your salivary glands are like going, holy smokes, because what you're tasting is a lower alcohol, vibrant acid wine and no sugar. So automatically your taste buds are going to just fire off on all cylinders. And sometimes it's a little bit crazy the more complex the wine is, and sometimes it's a little bit more simplistic. So this is a little bit kind of in between, a little bit more complex and a little bit simplistic all at the same time.
I have a question. So for this Aloft Chenin Blanc that we're drinking, there's the cork and there's the wax topper to the cork. Yes. What is the difference between using a foil label and doing something like this?
One of the things that we really kind of wanted to focus on, and I'll kind of show it to you, beeswax. For those of you guys, I have my own bee apiaries. It's one of my side gigs that I do. I know, I'm
so cool.
Woman of mystery. It's actually very soothing for those of you guys that want to know all about bee apiaries, and it's very complex all at the same time. But beeswax, the smell is the most intoxicating smell when it's fresh beeswax, and fresh beeswax should have this color. It shouldn't be faded. But when you actually have it and you pop that off, you can actually grab it and you can actually smell the beautiful aromatics of what fresh beeswax actually smells like.
Yeah.
But then the other beauty behind it is it's actually an antibacterial. So you don't have to worry. And I actually love cellaring my white wines. One, because they're bone dry and there's very little residual sugar in it. And two, Chenin Blanc has that ability to age. So I thought it would be kind of fun, instead of doing our normal seal like we do with all of our other ones, our normal capsules, actually having a little bit of fun with this item and actually showcasing our corks a little bit more and the beauty behind the cork, but also have a little bit of a nuance that's just a little bit different than what everyone else is kind of doing.
Yeah. And so back to the way that you've been doing wine tastings since the pandemic hit, how did you modify them for our new reality, or, the reality that has played out over the last few months?
Absolutely. So my sisters and I actually have a 4-pack that we have available that you can buy. So you get each one of our wines. So we make 4 different wines for the Mondavi Sisters collection. And it comes in this beautiful box that we actually created and built specifically for our virtual tasting customers. And then the other thing that we are actually doing, we're working a lot with corporate groups right now and creating a cool corporate environment where we're tasting either 1 or 2 wines at most, and they get to choose which wines they actually want to taste. So the beauty behind the virtual tastings is you can modify it to what you're wanting to do. We've gone so crazy as we've had a progressive 5-course dinner with a group of our customers. And each one actually made a meal to go with that specific wine from recipes that I've either given them or that they wanted to try on their own and ask me, hey, do you think this will pair well? Or do you think I'm missing the mark? And 99% of the time, I'm usually really intrigued by what these guys are
That's so interesting
coming up with.
To see what people come up with. And on that note, on the website, I should say that on the website this week, we are actually featuring 2 recipes, 2 of your family recipes. So everyone will stay tuned for that. You said, I mean, people had a really great response to your virtual tastings, right?
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun. And the other thing too is when you actually are doing a virtual tasting with either the owner or especially the winemaker like myself, you really you have that luxury of getting down to the nitty gritty and asking those burning questions about stuff that you're maybe too embarrassed to ask maybe the host at the tasting room.
Right, on a wine tour, like in a group.
Exactly. So when you're in that little private setting, the gloves kind of get to come off a little bit and you can really just be yourself, but it's also kind of fun to watch everyone in their own environment as well and enjoying out of their own wine glasses that they actually own. So it's been really kind of comical and kind of interesting because we've actually had to go through the process of educating the difference between wine glasses as well. And I'm actually trying, it actually reminds me that I need to reach out to Maximilian Riedel again and be like, hey, let's do a collaborative on this because I think it's so important for people to understand how important glassware actually is when tasting.
It really is, and it's funny that you bring that up because I was thinking about my glassware, and I was thinking about the fact that all my the glasses that you're thinking of, all of them have broken. So I've had like some version of a little stemless or, and I thought about, there really is, when you're tasting wine at least, you need to be pouring wine into different types of glasses for red and for rosés, right, and whites, in order to really understand what the taste is. But it just, in doing this with you today, it made me realize that I actually don't have any more of my traditional wine glasses. I have all these little, style versions of wine glasses. But when you're tasting, it's important to taste in the right vessel. Right?
Yeah, and I always say, if you're an individual, if you're not going down to the nitty gritty and you're not really smelling and you're not trying to be critical of it, it doesn't really matter what glass you're going to put it in. But if you're wanting to get down to the nitty gritty and really understand that wine from the core and really understand what the winemaker's style is and all that sort of stuff, it's very important for you to actually have the right wine glass. But it goes so much as, when you have a smaller glass, and if I were to put the red wine in it and I literally take a whiff of it, the only thing I'll smell is actually alcohol because the alcohol is truncated in. Whereas when you actually have it in the larger glass, the alcohol has enough room to escape, but
to aerate.
Yeah, but the actual aromatics will actually stay in the glass. So I'll be able to really nitpick and say, okay, this is what it smells like. And it's very crazy, and I didn't really understand it until I actually took a class with Maximilian Riedel, and he does a lot of virtual stuff like that, and it's really eye-opening and enlightening when you taste something like my Zinfandel, and he created a glassware specifically for Zinfandel, and then we tasted them side by side with the glass that we were using versus the glass that's specialized for it, and I was like, holy smoke, this is like life-changing.
That's
so
really fascinating.
So much so we have completely changed all of our glassware to specifically correspond to the wines that we're actually tasting. So it's a lot of fun. It's cool.
That's interesting. I have a question about the Chenin Blanc that we're talking about. How does this need to be refrigerated, or what? I have so many questions about temperature and refrigeration, and what are the rules for temperature in both red and white wines at home, both for storage and for immediate drinking? Like, does this go right into a refrigerator? What are those rules?
Yeah, so what I actually do is my white wines that I'm ready to drink, or I think I'm going to be drinking within that week, I'll actually put into the refrigerator, and I think the refrigerators are usually around 46 degrees, 45 degrees. So that's a little too cold for my liking. So what I'll actually do is about 30 minutes before, I'll actually pull that white wine out, let it temper a little bit, and then it's ready to pour. Because one of the things, when it's so cold, it actually dumbs down the aromatics. Now for a red wine, I always find it important. I'm in my wine cellar. I keep my wine cellar about 56 degrees, 54 degrees. It just depends. So I usually turn it down during the summer months when it gets hot here, just to maintain that temperature. But usually about 56 degrees, I'm really happy with.
How much do you turn it down in the summer? What is that?
I usually just leave it down to about 54. And some people, and I know some people are probably cringing right now going, oh my God. It's just my preference. I actually prefer, especially during the summer months, to pull out a red. When it's 100 degrees outside, I want a little bit of coolness on my wine still. So bringing it up to about 62 degrees, I'm like the happiest person ever, because it means that I'm going to enjoy not a lukewarm wine. I'm going to actually enjoy a wine that has a little bit of coolness to it, but I can also still smell everything. The colder you get the wines for both white and reds, the more dumbed down and subdued those aromatics actually become. So you don't want to get it so cold. But everyone's preference is completely different. And I think that that's also kind of fun. My mom loves drinking wine like straight out of the fridge.
Yeah.
It's like,
I feel like that's such a mom thing.
It's her
jam. Is that like
jam.
a universal mom thing?
It might be, I don't know. It's her jam, but my dad started doing it too recently, and I literally sit there and I was like, "How do you?" And my dad's like, "Why aren't you drinking?" I was like, "Because I need it to warm up. I need to smell it." But that's just my preference. So it's kind of funny, you know. And it's
we love hearing what your preference is.
Yeah,
it's an expert. You're an expert, and it's interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Yes. So I was going to quickly talk a little bit about the Chenin Blanc and just its uniqueness, because
please, here we go. There it is.
We only sell these wines direct to consumer, so you're not going to actually see them at any grocery store or really any restaurant for that matter.
Let me just interject for a second. So so it's episode 73 featuring Angelina, and in the podcast show notes, there's a direct link to Aloft and to Dark Matter and what you're speaking to. So explain how people can acquire this wine.
Yeah, so if you actually go to our website, aloftwine.com or darkmatterwines.com, you can actually hit the acquire page and you'll sign up for the mailing list. And once you get on the mailing list, then you'll be privy to getting the emails when we actually release. And if you guys are listening now and you're interested in buying either of our wines, what you can actually do is you can actually email us at aloft.darkmatter@mondavisisters.com. It's long, I know, but
no, and I think this is a really opportune time to talk about supporting you women as sisters and female winemakers. I think it's really cool. I think it's really important. You touched on this in the beginning. You have 3 other sisters, and Aloft, which is the label that you bought this label in 2017.
Yes.
And Dark Matter, which is the red that we're going to be tasting, you created with your sisters in 2005.
Correct.
Can you just first tell us a little bit more about how you work with your 3 sisters on both of these labels?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. It's actually really fun and collaborative. And the beauty behind my sisters and I, and the uniqueness is, we joke and say our dad and our parents actually created an executive team. So I deal with the production side. So I'm either out in the vineyards or I'm in the winery. And I also do the virtual tastings and our social media as well. But then on the other side, you have my one sister who's our CEO and basically our marketing guru, Alicia. And she basically creates all the label designs and really takes everything. As soon as I bottle everything, she takes it to that next level, adds on the capsules, adds on the wax and the labels, and puts it all into our packaging. Everything of ours is sold in 3 packs only. So you can't buy just a single bottle of it anymore. And the idea behind working with Alicia on that was, you know, we want people to be able to, because there's nothing more annoying than you buying just 1 bottle of wine and you fall in love with it and then you call and it's like, sorry, we're sold out already. So the idea is then you at least have that ability to have 2 more wines if you love it that much. And if you love it, you have 1 bottle, you can literally call us up and say, hey, we want more.
That's so smart. That's so smart.
It's really cool. And then Rihanna, our number 3 sister, helps with sales and a little bit of distribution, because Aloft is actually distributed in a few states, and we're in Illinois and Texas and Florida. and we're just opening up in Nevada, specifically Las Vegas.
Perfect.
Yeah, for us, it made a lot of sense. And although things are still kind of closed down, we're really looking forward to things kind of opening up and really hitting the ground running everywhere, actually.
They will. That's exciting. Very exciting.
It's really, really cool. And then our youngest sister is actually learning the finance side. She's in finance and actually works for Massachusetts Financial Services. So that's her day-to-day job. And then she helps out with tastings every now and then, or hosting and doing tours and tastings if neither Alicia nor I can actually handle it for the day.
Some of the things that I love most, and this is on the podcast as well, but you talk a lot. I love, it's so heartwarming to me and so interesting to me that you all, you know, want to be involved in the family business. It's like a real passion for all of you. And it's just one of those things where, you know, the whole family is in sync in that way. And it's so interesting to see. So you created Dark Matter, your label. Yes. Dark Matter, in 2005. So what got the ball rolling on that?
We actually acquired a 2-acre parcel up in Hell Mountain. And the important thing for my dad and my mom when we actually bought it was that I was going to take over the winemaking and kind of figure myself out and who I was as a winemaker. And it made a lot of sense. I was 21 at the time. And the one question that my dad asked was, there was almost 2 acres of Zinfandel planted on it. It's just shy of 2 acres. And the vineyard was very, very neglected. It had gone through, the previous owners were going through a divorce, and just none of the money was actually getting put back into the vineyard anymore. So it was good timing for us. So in 2005 or 3, when we actually bought the vineyard, I asked Dad, you know, can we just keep the vineyard and rehab it instead of ripping it out and doing what everyone's expecting us to do, which is making a Cabernet. Yeah, we're tasting a Cabernet today, but the Zinfandel was really the first and the foremost. And it was really this concept and this idea behind really creating our own footholds in this industry with the largest shoes to fill. I mean, it's not easy being behind your grandfather who created cold fermentation and who brought in the first French oak barrels to California and, you know, really put Napa Valley on the map between my grandfather and my great uncle, Robert Mondavi. And when you add all that in, it's like, who is the next generation? Who is the 4th generation? No one knows anything about us. So the beauty behind the name Dark Matter was everyone thinks that they know, but they really don't know who we are. And it really correlated with how dark matter is, because people think that they know what dark matter is, but it's really difficult to explain. So it was just very serendipitous. And then the skull, we had a designer in Australia actually come up.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. And you know, you touched on labels a bit earlier about how one of your sisters is in charge of all the marketing and the packaging. And the label is amazing. It's a skull, obviously everyone can see that, but it was very ahead of its time. You know, this was a label that was ahead of its time, and it kind of created a bit, I wouldn't say controversy for you, but people didn't take to it at first. Can you tell us some of those stories?
Yeah, we actually were told not even God would buy it and that it represents poisoned. And there's a few other comments that kind of came out of it. And my sisters and I, the rebels that we are, really kind of looked at it and said, well, this is our opportunity to create our own stamp and really showcase what we know. And we knew that the wines that I were making were really good. I just wasn't expecting it to quite get when we came out with the label, to quite get the turn off and being told by vintners in the valley that this just was not acceptable. And my sisters and I basically said, perfect, let's run with it. And we ran with it, and we've never looked back. We joke and say, you know, we were at the same time that Alexander McQueen was really starting to become very, very popular at the same time. So we kind of laugh about it, saying, wow, okay, we're kind of, you know, we're the trendsetter. Because now if you go out into the marketplace, I can't tell you, there's at least 20 wines that actually have a skull somewhere on the label or as the front label, but we were the first to actually put a skull on the front label, and it does not represent poison. It really just represents who we
I mean,
are.
that's what anyone will tell you, like when you're branding something. I was actually having a conversation about branding a little earlier, but you're always going to get people that say, if you use red, won't attract this customer. If you use a skull, that means poison. So it was really courageous of you as young people in wine at the time to say, well, maybe that's what it was. We're going to run with it. This is our idea. We're not doing a lot of research. It's like the more you know, the more you get into your own head. Maybe you were just like, we feel it in our gut and we're going to run with it.
And I think that that's really kind of what transpired, was we really felt it in our gut, and it made the story behind it makes a lot of sense. And when you know our family, I mean, every Mondavi that you ever meet is involved in the wine industry. And if they tell you that they're a Mondavi and they are not part of the wine industry, I can tell you they are not related to us whatsoever. And they clearly had a name change halfway through life. Because the whole Mondavi family is in one way, shape, or form. We are all very integrated in the wine industry.
It's amazing to me. It's so incredible.
And it shows how small our family really is too. People think our family is very large, and that's actually not really the case.
Yeah, we talk all about your family members. We talk a lot about your specific family members on the podcast, which is like another really interesting part of it. Before we move on to red, do you want to talk a little bit about what you like to pair this with?
So the recipe that's going to be coming out is actually a ceviche recipe, a shrimp ceviche recipe that I think absolutely pairs dynamo with this. But if you're not into shrimp or you're not into seafood, a simple caprese salad with a little bit of fresh mozzarella. We're starting to get into tomato season here in California. Because it's been like 88 degrees here. Other than yesterday's weird fluke hailstorm and rainstorm that we got yesterday. But when tomato season comes into play and the fresh basil starts coming out, which it's starting to bud right now, doing a fresh caprese salad, if you don't have tomatoes, use a beautiful nectarines or peaches even are a great way and substitute if you don't have really good tomatoes. That's a really fun dish. Another dish that I absolutely love is just doing a simple roast chicken. And you're only using a little bit of thyme, a little bit of oregano, salt. And I usually use I just use kosher salt and a little bit of ghee and a tinge of just a small amount of lemon juice. And I actually will roast that. And it goes so well with the Chenin Blanc, and it's so simple. It's not
perfect. Those are such great suggestions.
Yeah.
Speaking of food, one of my favorite parts of the podcast as well is when you talk about food and wine traditions in your family. You were given wine diluted with water as a kid, right? And meal times were always big moments. Do you want to talk about that?
For those of you guys that don't know, an Italian family, you're always in the kitchen, you're always eating, and you're always commiserating about something or arguing about something, and it always happens in the kitchen. It doesn't matter which house we're at. If it's at mom's house, it's in the kitchen. If it's at my house, we're in the kitchen. My sister's house, the exact same thing. So we always just kind of grew up having family talks and discussions while munching or eating whatever it was that we had in the kitchen with a little bit of wine, and really learning the nuances of wine and food pairing early on. And I think it takes out that mystery. Wine and food pairings are supposed to be fun. They're not supposed to be daunting and, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. Because if that's the case, then you need to take a step back, dial it back, and say, okay, this is about fun. You're gonna have errors sometimes where you're pairing something that you in your head thinks it's gonna go absolutely amazing together, and then you try it and you're like, that was the biggest crash and train wreck I've ever tasted.
Angelina, are there any tips for teaching people or having people tune into what is a good pairing?
Yeah, I always, one of the simple things that I always hear a lot of people talk about is, keep like with like. So when you're tasting a white wine, keep it with either fish or seafood base or chicken. But I'm a little bit more daring, and I actually say, if you like white wine, go ahead. You can do a chicken, or go a little bit crazy and try a pork chop with it, and use a little bit of that wine that you're drinking as part of the glaze to help incorporate if you feel like it's just not going to quite work. That's a huge secret in our family, is if we're not sure it's going to pair that well, just dose in a little bit of the wine that you drink it, and cook with it as well. And it's almost a guarantee that it'll actually marry itself.
Oh, I love that trick from the Mondavi family.
Yeah, it's a long-standing tradition. And then for reds, you know, it's each to your own. I love eating my reds with fish. So it's just kind of what I do. I eat a lot of salmon at home. So there's times where I'll actually have a Cabernet or even a Pinot or a Zinfandel with salmon. It's very, for some people, it's very weird and they can't wrap their head around it. For me, salmon can handle the tannins that are in some of these bigger reds that you can get out of California.
Should we move on to dark matter and tasting that?
Absolutely. So this is, you're tasting the 2015.
Hold on. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Oh, this is a spectacular wine.
Thank you. So everything.
I mean, they both are, but you know, I'm like you. I think you said your favorite is like a Cabernet, and
yeah,
it's kind of mine too.
I'm a huge Cabernet lover. Yeah. It's really kind of my go-to. The white wine was brought into the portfolio because one of my sisters actually doesn't really drink a whole lot of reds. So she asked for a white wine, and that's how we came about with the Chenin Blanc. But it was perfect because Chenin Blanc was what our grandfather used to make back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s. We were the largest Chenin Blanc producer in California. And now we only have less than 10 acres of Chenin Blanc actually planted in Napa Valley. So we're trying to create a resurgence and a revival of the grape varietal because it's such an amazing grape varietal. But then you have the total opposite spectrum, the Cabernet Sauvignon, which is king here in California, specifically in Napa Valley. And this is a fun wine because this is really a testament of who I am as a winemaker and kind of my personality. But this is 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. All my wines are 100% in our entire portfolio. The idea behind that is I want to be varietally correct, and I want to focus and accentuate what that terroir is specifically telling me. And this actually comes off of my mom and dad's property. So they have a 20-acre parcel, 12 acres is planted to solely Cabernet Sauvignon. And we're lucky enough to buy fruit from mom and dad. And this is clone 191. So it has this beautiful, vibrant acid to it. That will allow this wine to age. But then you also taste it, and it's got these, I mean, I
love how I just like go in and take a big sip.
Oh.
I'm not following the rules, Angelina.
You're totally fine because I actually want to drink the whole thing right now.
I mean,
it's
this
smelling
wine,
so good.
So good.
So for those of you guys that have never had our Dark Matter Limitless Cabernet Sauvignon, 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, 100% new French oak barrels. We barrel age it for 24 months. Then we bottle age it for a year before we release it. So we're doing the aging for you, but this wine has that ability to actually age for another 20 plus years easily because of the tannin and the beautiful vibrant acid in this wine. This is a cool property because it only receives morning sun. It doesn't receive the intense afternoon sun. So when I actually pick the berries are still very hard, and tannin management is the most critical part of all the winemaking for this wine. Making sure that I don't, when you're tasting it, it's not like licking sandpaper. It's very important.
You can taste all that care and nuance in this wine.
Yeah, it's got cassis, it has tobacco leaf, it has black tea leaf. I'm getting blackberry, I'm getting raspberry, I'm getting red and black cherry. I'm getting a little bit of that Bing cherry and almost kind of a dark pepper note to it as well, which is really kind of funny, but maybe that's because I'm craving Dr. Pepper right now. I didn't have my coffee this morning, so.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, look at you and your palate, Angelina. You have all these sort of palate things that you deal with as a winemaker, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've never heard anyone say that. Like, I'm smelling black pepper because didn't have coffee and I need that flavor. That's so interesting.
It's weird. Yeah, so sometimes your senses will hone in on something. You're like, oh, And all of our wines are bone dry, so there isn't that sweetness to it, but there is an elegance to it that's really, it coats your entire mouth. And that's something that I'm known for with my winemaking, but it's also really, really fun at the same time, because this is a wine that just keeps giving. Like, you taste it once and you're like, ooh, this is really intriguing. You taste it again and you're like, wow, okay, like, I'm totally digging this. And this is a wine, if you're looking for wine pairings for this, I think of probably like a ribeye or anything with a little bit of fat to it. Even a Wagyu would go killer with this. And then the recipe that we're going to be sharing is actually my Nona's meatball.
I love it. She went right for the meatballs. It's your grandmother's meatball recipe.
Yeah, it's my grandmother's meatball recipe. I've tweaked it just a little bit. I've added a few things. Her recipe never called for Wagyu. We actually tried it with Wagyu, and I actually do a combo between the Wagyu and just regular beef, because for those of you guys that don't know, Wagyu's ridiculously expensive. So I dose in. I usually order one of those and then do 2 packets, but the seasoning in it's critical, and then the pecorino to top it off is like to die for.
2000%. And a little bit of that Wagyu probably goes a long way, right? Just get it in there.
Yeah, it's so fatty.
I mean, that's another thing that people don't know. I mean, you either know or you don't know. Is that like Italians are always after like the perfectly tender meatball, right? Like the meatball and I bet the Wagyu helps with that big time, right?
It really helps. It also makes it less dense too.
Yeah.
And then instead of breadcrumbs, actually using panko crumbs. So my grandmother's recipe always called for breadcrumbs, and I switched it over to panko, and it's created a much less denser meatball.
Yep.
So we have this running joke in the family now. My dad's like, okay, what other tricks are you going to pull out of your sleeve and completely change Nona's recipe? And I was like, yeah, but Nona's recipe is Nona's recipe, and even if I try 1,000 times, it'll never be good as what my Nona's recipe was.
Yeah, you can never recreate what she would put out, right?
And I'm pretty certain all of her recipes, I'm convinced she left out an ingredient in almost every one.
You said that.
I'm convinced, because I was like,
people really do that, don't they? They don't.
Yeah, because they don't want it mimicked.
They want to be the one to serve you the most beautiful dish, right?
Exactly. It's fun, but I love this wine. I love Cabernet, and I think it's just unique, and it's a little bit different. In addition to our dark matter cab, we actually make our Zinfandel coming from where we originally started. So in 2011 was our release of our Cabernet Sauvignon, but before that it was solely our Zinfandel. We are known for our Zinfandel. We sell out of our Zinfandel. Our cab is now building a rapport with individuals that are just coming back and saying this is one of the best cabs I've ever tasted. Our 2016 just received 98 plus points. It got rated, and we didn't even know it got rated. So my dad's pretty happy, because that means that scores are starting to come out from that vineyard that he owns. But it's just fun, and it's a fun label, and our collection's just fun. We're about being serious as being winemakers, but the ultimate goal is, we want you to enjoy your wine with friends and family and with great food. There's nothing better. And now that we're kind of opening up here in the country,
we are.
Hopefully a few more parties will be happening soon. I'm hoping.
Yeah, right.
Not quite happening here in California yet. We're still kind of reopening things, but it's just nice to see people again.
And so, Angelina, were you saying that you only sell 3 bottles at a time, or do you sell by the case?
We can sell by the case. So we have our Limitless, we have allocations or annual memberships available. So you can choose 3 bottles, 6 bottles, or 12 bottles of this. And the same for our Chenin Blanc as well.
Go and do it. They're both spectacular.
Thank you.
What innovations are you seeing in wine these days? What's most exciting to you? I don't know.
That's a great question. Right now, a lot of winemakers are talking about the vessels and the type of vessels that they are using for fermentation. I'm a little bit more old school. I actually use pungens for fermentation, which are larger barrels that I pop the head off. and it's all manual work. But as we're growing, those are starting to change, and we're actually having to use stainless steel tanks. But the other thing that I'm kind of focusing on right now is we're looking at, you know, different glass bottles, trying to figure out how to be as sustainable as we can. So our packaging is all recyclable, and we're working with a company based out of Chicago, Illinois. We used to be international, and COVID hit, and the ability for us to get packaging just became almost next to near impossible. And it made a lot of sense for us to kind of bring our roots back to the United States and really focus on that. So all of our stuff is now being made. Our glass is made in France, but you know, we continue every year. We continue talking with some of these guys and saying, "Hey, can you guys make a mold for us that's based here in California?" Because we want to be 100% domestically sourcing, and we want to support, you know, our neighbors and individuals. And we're getting there slowly but surely, but it's definitely a process, and making sure that they actually hit the quality that we're looking for is so critical.
Yes.
COVID definitely threw a wrinkle in almost every stop of the production. So that was really kind of interesting and kind of fascinating, but we're working through it.
I have another question for you as we wrap up here. What are you looking forward to in your work this year? You know, you experienced a lot last year. You experienced wildfires, and you experienced COVID, and you've had to pivot, just like, you know, a lot of us have.
Everyone.
What are you kind of looking forward to now in 2021?
I am praying, knock on wood. I don't know what's wood around here. My head. I am praying that this year harvest goes smooth, and that we actually can bring in fruit. For those of you guys that don't know, my sisters and I didn't bring in any reds into our portfolio in 2020 because the wildfires, the smoke taint was just too much for us to try to salvage or even work with it. So we opted not to bring in any red. We brought in our Chenin Blanc right at the start of the first fire. So I know we escaped with that, and that's the only 2020 wine, and it's actively out, and we are halfway sold through when we released it a couple weeks ago. So I think for me, it's just, I'm looking for a little normalcy. Hopefully no evacuations this year.
Just that.
I don't know. I'm just looking for a little bit more normalcy, you know? Yeah. And I think
it's the small things these days, right?
Yeah. I mean, for those of you guys, I don't know about you guys, but I've really been hunkered down. The fear of losing my sense of smell and my taste buds for months on end has been a very big concern.
You know what? I never thought about that for you. I didn't think about that, but for you, that potential of losing your sense of taste is just, I mean, it just doesn't get worse than that, right?
It's really scary. And I'm watching, you know, there's some sommeliers that are, you know, they're having to retrain their palates. And so for me, I kind of hunkered down in 2020.
Good for you.
Now that I'm vaccinated, I feel a little bit more comfortable, but I'm still not to the comfort level as what I was prior to. So it's going to take me a little while to start traveling again and start seeing our customers, you know, internationally and nationally, but we're getting there. You know, everyone's getting there slowly but surely, but for me, it's been a little bit the past couple of weeks with the weather being nice, being able to go out on hikes and kind of just having a little bit more of a normal routine than what we've had for over a year. You can feel the positivity, and you can feel those energy. You can feel the energy back in the valley that we.
I couldn't agree more, and you were so right in protecting those epic taste buds of yours and being careful. Okay, let's do a toast.
Yes.
And let's do this again, okay? We need to do another. We need to do more tastings.
I totally agree with you.
Listen to Story & Rain Talks. It's episode 73. You can also shop the show notes. You can find Angelina's wines there, as well as some other things. Listen to it. It's a great one. And sign up for wine tastings, right?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers.
Great to see you, babe.
Great to see you too. Thank you.